Last episode, I talked about the confusion I ran into when trying to trace Drake's paternal ancestry. So I'm not going to go over that again, but I'm going to link to that episode that I did last week in the description box. The good news is that I'm going to give Drake the benefit of the doubt and go through his paternal African American ancestry as if all the assumptions we have about his ancestors are correct. That being that his grandfather is Wilson Larry Graham. But the awesome thing is even if I was wrong and even if Drake's ancestry turns out to be a little different than what we're talking about here, this episode will always be a document of the ancestry of Larry Graham Jr., famous bassist for Sly and the Family Stone. He invented the famous slap bass technique. So that's a pretty good place to be, is to talk about his family as well. I'm Yona Paley, and I believe genealogy is fun. Today, we're going to be digging through some Louisiana records going back all the way to the 1870s and 1880s in order to trace the paternal ancestry of Aubrey Drake Graham. Before we begin, I want to briefly tell you about a website I've created which can help family researchers connect with each other. Kinsley is a social media website for genealogists. It allows you to create a page for your family, each of which has its own designated forum. The page then gets put into a searchable database so that users can find and join the groups they are interested in connecting with. The homepage contains a curated feed with all the specific groups and family members that you're a part of. That way you'll never miss an update and you can stay tuned into the findings and notifications of your family lines. As more members and families join the site, it becomes a powerful and simple tool for keeping track of your genealogical endeavors. Sign up today completely for free at kinsleyconnect.com/register. Let's get this family show on the road. Drake was born in 1986 in Toronto, Canada to Dennis James Graham and Sandy Scher. On another episode, I had talked about Sandy's Jewish ancestry, which goes all the way back to Ukraine. But in this episode, we're talking about Drake's paternal ancestry. So his African American ancestry, which his family hails from Memphis, but as we're going to soon find out, actually before then they came from Louisiana. Dennis was one of 10 siblings and half-siblings born in Memphis, Tennessee, but he also had 3 half-brothers and sisters who had lived in Texas and California that he didn't know about. And his parents were Wilson Larry Graham and Ann Beatrice Driver. It was a very musical family with at least 2 of the brothers, Dennis Graham, who is a professional drummer, and Larry Graham Jr., who's a professional bassist, becoming musicians. But it actually didn't start there because, according to iHeartRadio, the mother, Ann Beatrice Driver, she used to actually babysit Aretha Franklin, which I initially thought was kind of a dubious claim, but I went through the censuses and it turns out that when she was young, she and Aretha Franklin's father lived on the same exact street, just a 1-minute walk away from each other. So I think this is actually probably correct, or at least somebody in the family probably babysat Aretha Franklin, though she did move out of Memphis when she was just 2 years old. Wilson's obituary tells us that he was originally from Basile, Louisiana. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And also that he was working for a construction company in Beaumont, Texas. Thankfully, the obituary gives us the name of a bunch of his children and siblings, as well as his parents, which were James Graham and Belula. Using a variety of censuses, draft cards, and even an obituary, it turns out that James Graham was originally from Port Barre, Louisiana, and he worked for a railroad company most of his life. But in addition to that, he had a part-time job as a police officer and even helped build his church in his local town. It says that he had a side hobby of being a carpenter. Along with Belula and one other spouse, he had at least 9 children, and if you're picking up on a pattern here, it's that pretty much every single generation of the Graham family has had a ton of kids. Heading back another generation, we find Drake's great-great-grandparents, John Graham and Virginia Pickney. And according to the 1910 U.S. federal census, John was a farmer and the couple had a total of 11 children. But it doesn't end there, because we can actually find John in the 1880 census as well, living with a number of siblings, as well as his parents, Henry Graham and Azalima Hampton. Henry and Azalima lived in the 3rd Ward of St. Landry Parish in Louisiana, and they all worked in the fields. It's pretty apparent that Henry and his wife were most likely enslaved. They don't show up in the 1870 census, but I was able to find their marriage document, which, even though they started having kids in around 1868, the marriage certificate was only documented in 1885. And if you think that, this is the final generation of the family I was able to find because I wasn't able to get the 1870 census, think again, because Family Search, thankfully, has a lot of indexed death records from this parish in Louisiana, and one of those showed the death of Henry Graham. And what it shows, and this is only a transcription, so take this with a grain of salt, that his father was named Pitt Graham. Now, since this is a transcribed document and I wasn't able to attain the original, I think it's like $30 or so to order from the state of Louisiana, it's quite possible that the father was actually named, Peter or something similar to this, because when I did a search for people named Pitt in that area, there didn't seem to be anyone, but Peter was a name that I saw show up a couple of times, so I think it's probably more likely than not that his name was Peter, but we'll go with the transcription and call him Pitt. And this is Drake's 4th great-grandfather, which is pretty solid given the fact that even just finding who his grandfather was proved to be a little bit difficult, but now we're able to trace the family all the way back to most likely the early 1800s in the 3rd Ward of St. Landry Parish in Louisiana. Let me know what you think. If there's anything that I missed, you can tell me in the comment section down below, and I've also included links to my Instagram and my Twitter, so be sure to follow me. As always, I'm looking forward to bringing you more videos as well as tips and tricks that you can use in your own genealogy research. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.